Hello, my name is Weir. I'm a storyteller and I'm delighted to have recorded some Halloween stories for the Island Arts Centre. These few are for adults, spooky tales of ghosts and banshees. I hope you enjoy them.
There was a family up in Donegal who had 7 wee girls, all steps and stairs. But when the oldest girl, Moya, had just turned 7 and the baby was just a few weeks old, the father took consumption, what we now know as TB, and died. His young wife tried to keep the farm going, but no, even with the help of neighbours, they knew that as soon as the oldest girl, Moya, was the age to be hired out, she'd have to go off with her bundle to the hiring fair and go and work for a farmer for 6 months at a time to bring back money. Wee Moya, only about 14, went with her bundle under her arm and stood there waiting for somebody to come and hire her. And finally, a farmer and his wife took her, put her in a cart, took her far from home to West Donegal. They had a long, low farmhouse. They brought her in and showed her over to a step ladder up to a half loft. Hardly bigger than a cupboard, but for Moya it was her own room. It had a window looking down into the yard. She knew very soon that the woman of the house was kind. Showed her how to do all the work, but the man of the house, bad-tempered, heavy-handed, he would lift his hand not only to the girl but also to his own wife. And the two of them spent their whole time walking on eggshells, trying to keep out of his way. One winter's day, a snowstorm had blown in. The woman of the house had gone off to do messages. The man of the house hadn't come home from his work. Moya had the food ready, but neither master nor mistress came. So all she could do would be to cover the food, bank up the fire for the night, and go up to her bed. She had only been sleeping about half an hour when she heard the downstairs door crash open, the man of the house shouting, roaring, "Where's the woman of this house? What sort of house is this? No food for a hungry man," and staggering over towards the steps up to her room. And although she was a young and innocent girl, she knew she wasn't safe there. So she jumped down out of the window, down into the snow, in her bare feet in her long white nightdress, wandering through the snow, not knowing where she was going. But suddenly she was snatched up onto a horse by a man who put a cloak around her and said, "Don't worry, child, you're safe with me." And whether it was his voice, her heart pounding, or the movement of the horse, she fell asleep with her head to his breast like a baby. When she woke up, she was lifted off the horse. It was daylight. When she turned round, horse and rider had vanished, and there she was at the gateposts of her own family farm. She ran and banged on the door and fell into her mother's arms. Her mother, of course, wanted to know how she got there, and she told the story just the way I'm telling you. And her mother listened and thought and said, "Moya, did you notice anything about the man's hand, the man on the horse?" She said, "Why, yes, mother. He had a scar like a crescent moon on the back of his hand." Her mother said, "That, daughter dear, was your own dead father." In Ireland there are many, many stories about ghosts and banshees. The banshee was the foreteller of death. My story is about a young man called Jamie McIntyre. He was coming home late one night towards midnight from a dance, and there in the moonlight he saw a beautiful girl sitting on a wall. She had long golden hair which she was combing. She had a beautiful green dress, and she set down her comb, and I don't know what notion took him, but Jamie snatched up the comb and ran off, hoping she would run after him. She certainly did. But he heard this yowl and this wail. When he turned his head in the moonlight, it wasn't a beautiful girl who was chasing him. Oh no, it was a hag with long white hair and white tattered clothes chasing after him, yowling and howling. And he knew this was a banshee. He ran for all his life to his own house, slammed in the door, locked the door, bolted it. And his mother said, "What on earth have you done?" Because outside she could hear the wailing closer, closer. And then she looked, and he had the comb in his hand. She said, "What have you done?" He said, "I took a comb for the sport." She said, "That's a banshee's comb. She'll never give it up." The mother went over to the fireplace and lifted up iron tongs and cast the comb in them and put them down under the half door. There was a tremendous yowl, and when she withdrew the tongs again, the whole end of the tongs had been snapped off. She said, "Do you see, Jimmy? That's what would have happened to you." So from then on, Jamie McIntyre never, ever came home late from a dance. In Ireland long ago, young boys and girls would meet at the crossroads in summertime and dance. Couples would come, maybe somebody would play a fiddle or a whistle, and they'd dance all evening until it was time to peel off and go home. On one such evening, there was only one person not dancing. People didn't even know she was there. This was a young woman who had crept up from the village and was watching under cover of the hedge, watching the dancers with tears pouring down her cheeks. For this young woman had been engaged to a young fisherman, but a few months before his body had been found drowned. He was buried on up the coast, but still she was drawn back to that place where they were so happy. And watching the dancers, she saw a horseman arrive and join in the dancing. He seemed a good dancer. And as the couples peeled away, soon there were only two people left, the weeping girl and the horseman. He walked over to where she was. It was as if he knew she was there, and he said, "Come and dance." She said, "I'm not dancing, my fiancé's dead." Crying will bring nobody back. And in truth, that girl had cried day and night, night and day, from the minute she received the news of his death. Tears had even soaked into her pillow, but now this man pulled her by the wrist and started swinging her around. Without meaning to, her feet started doing the moves of the dance. And as he swung her around, a shaft of moonlight caught the side of his face, and she said, "Michael, they told me you were dead." Is that what they told you? "Oh, but you're here now, you'll never leave me." "No," he said, "I must go before morning." "I'll come with you." "No," he said, "my home is far from here. It's small, it's cold, it's damp. There's hardly room for one, let alone two." "I'll come." "Very well." He called up his horse, jumped up on it, pulled her up behind him, and she put her arms around his waist. A chill went through her from head to toe. She thought, "Why am I so cold on a summer's night?" And the horse started to gallop through the night, galloped and galloped. Her shawl blew up around her. She set it back and touched his shirt. His shirt was soaking wet. She thought, "Why has he got a wet shirt on such a night?" The horse galloped and then cantered and then trotted and then slowed to a trot and into a walk and turned in through the gates of a churchyard, picked its way amongst the graves, and then he drew it to a stop. He jumped off and pointed down and said, "This is my home. The little piece I've had to sleep in it for you, and you're crying day and night, night and day. Your tears have even soaked down into my grave. But now," he said, "now you'll stay with me." And when he turned to look at her, she was horrified to see the skin had left his face. She was looking at a whitened skull. "No!" She jumped off the horse, and he started chasing her through the graveyard. He grabbed her shawl. She threw it to the ground. She hopped over the fence and... Morning broke. When she turned around, there was only a wisp of smoke. She fainted. People bringing in the cows for milking found her, carried her into the house. She told this ridiculous story about a dead lover, talking skull, lost shawl. People thought the poor girl was simply touched. But then the next afternoon, the man who looked after the churchyard came and said he'd found a shawl. Could she come? And when she went down to the graveyard, the shawl was stuck fast in a grave. The minister agreed they could open it down, 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 and when they opened the coffin, there clutched in a bony hand was the end of her shawl, for this was indeed the grave of her fisherman lover. Said after that, she stopped crying. She never went back to the dancing place again. She was frightened her fisherman lover would come for her once and for all. A lot of people in Ireland know about the banshee, who foretells death. My own brother actually heard a banshee one night, saw her and heard her coming home, and he'd left a girl called O'Hara home. And they say that he was so terrified, he told me he stripped off his overcoat, his jacket, his jumper, and landed home just wearing his undershirt. And the girl O'Hara's grandmother died that night, so that's the belief. But the story I'm going to tell you is a very famous banshee story that comes from County Derry, from the town of Dungiven. Long ago, most of the land around Dungiven was owned by the man called O'Cahan. There's plenty of O'Cahan still around Dungiven. But he had 4 strong sons, but only one daughter, a beautiful young woman called FINVOLA. And because she was the only girl, well, she was spoiled. She got an education when girls didn't get an education. Her father and her brothers would have done anything for her. At that time, there was a great deal of trade between Ireland and Scotland. And on one occasion, the whole family were on a ship bound for Scotland when a storm blew up and the ship was wrecked on the shore. They were dragged half drowned out of the water, wondering would they ever see Ireland again, when coming towards them was a ship rowed by Norsemen. And standing tall in the prow was a Highlander, with his plaid over his shoulder and his bonnet with a feather. He was Angus Og MacDonald. His father was the Lord of the Isles, and he invited them back to his castle on Islay and gave them hospitality. It took several weeks before they could get a ship to take them home, and in that time Angus had fallen in love with FINVOLA. And so, when the O'Cahans returned to Dungiven, she brought Angus's heart with her. He pursued her and begged her father for her hand in marriage. No, my daughter's not marrying. No, she's not going to Scotland. No. Oh, FINVOLA said, this is the man for her. Please, Daddy, I want to marry him. And of course, he could forgive her, but he grant her any request. On one condition. He made Angus promise if anything were to happen to FINVOLA, Angus must promise to bring her body back to Ireland for burial. What young couple thinks about death at a time like this? Of course they agreed. They were married, happily married, and had several children. But when the last baby was born, FINVOLA took a fever and she died. Angus was out of his mind with grief, but then he remembered his promise and he thought, no, I can't send my wife back to Ireland. I can't do it. She'll be buried here. By the time the funeral's over, they won't even know anything about it in Ireland. But he reckoned without one thing, because the O'Cahan family, like many Irish families whose names start with Mac or O, had a family banshee, Grania Ro O'Cahan. She cried 3 nights running from Benbrada, the hill above Dungiven. Everybody in the family heard it. Who was sick, who was being prayed for, everybody was fine. There was only one person missing, and FINVOLA's father knew in his heart his daughter was dead. He armed his men to set sail for Scotland to bring her body home. The Scots saw them coming. They armed themselves. They were going to fight for their Irish princess. But Angus was a man of honour. He said, no. She came to me in love, and in love I will return her. And they loaded her body onto the ship, and they sailed back to Ireland. And she's buried there in the Priory at Dungiven. So if you ever travel the road between Belfast and Derry, stop off at Dungiven Priory. And that's where you'll find the resting place of FINVOLA O'Cahan. Most people know what a banshee is. She foretells death, but fewer people know another type of ghost called the Lananshee. She's a fairy lover. She sets her eye on a mortal man, and that's it. Bewitched, enchanted, entranced, any word you want to use. A young fisherman called Randall was coming home over the cliff tops near Ballantoy in County Antrim when he was followed by a Lananshee. She came after him, sighing and crying and tugging at his coat, and he knew if he looked into her eyes, he'd be gone, so he pulled his cap down, stayed still, and she left him there. And as he was walking home, he saw her off to the side of the road, burying something under a tall standing stone. He went home, he put salt in one pocket, iron in the other, to ward off enchantment. And then he went back and dug under that stone and pulled up a chest. When he opened it, it was full of gold, fairy gold. He brought it home and he buried it under a rowan tree. For the rowan or the rowan is a magical tree. Fairies can't touch it there. Night after night again she came, sighing, crying, banging on his window. Will she give me no peace? Now, this young man was handsome. He thought, maybe if I get married she'll leave me in peace. He was tall with black curly hair, long black lashes, broad shoulders, narrow waist. Young men like him were, and sadly still are, as rare as hen's teeth. All the girls in the village liked him. And one girl, Nancy, took his fancy. He proposed, she accepted. They went to her father. No, you won't marry my daughter. No. All you've got's a scattering of old mountainy sheep and a thatched roof that wants mending as poor shelter in a winter's day. Randall, he started to talk about the gold. Gold? Only gold you'll ever see is in the buttercups. But when he brought in the chest and opened it up, the father's eyes came out in stalks. Listen, that's treasure trove. I'll look after that. You marry my daughter. The match was made. He brought Nancy home to the house after the wedding, and she heard the wail, and what's that? Shh, nothing. Only the wind, and he pulled the curtains quickly. She got sort of used to it after a while. But when they were married 6 months, Nancy's father took ill. She had to go and look after him, and Randall came home from his work one night, beautiful moonlit night, slumped down in the chair, fell asleep without drawing the curtains. And all of a sudden he was jolted awake by a long, lonely cry, and when he looked up, he saw he was locked into the gaze of the Lananshee. He had to follow her off to the land of the Shee. For 7 long years he stayed there with her. And when at last he came back to his own house and peeped in the window, he was delighted to see his wife sitting by the fire, but she was rocking a cradle. And there was another young man in his seat. He walked in and said, Nancy, I'm home, love. She screamed. "Get out of my house, old man." "No, it's me, your husband, Randall." "Oh no," she said. "Oh, if you could have seen my husband, my handsome young husband. He was drowned in the sea 7 years ago. I waited 5 years before I married John here. No, my handsome husband had black hair, not like you." Just then Randall looked up into the mirror over the fireplace. He saw his black hair turned snowy white. He saw lines etched in his face and a haunted look in his eyes. And as he looked into that mirror, what did he see reflected back from outside but the beautiful face of the LABAN she? He gave a cry and he ran from that house, never to be seen again. As for the gold in the box, when Nancy's father opened it, all there was a handful of copper beech leaves. For they say, you know, it would be better for a man to be drowned at sea than to look into the face of the LABAN she. For after that there's nothing for him but wandering. For the face of the LABAN she is lovelier than a dream, and her song is lonelier than the seabird's call. This story happened long ago in Donegal. There was a family called O'Connor. A father, a mother, a wee boy called Sean, and a wee baby girl called Catchleen. They called her Katie for short. It was troubled times. Famine was on the land, and the family couldn't pay the rent. So early one morning, the landlord's men came to evict them from the house, and they found themselves standing outside, shivering in the cold, the mother holding the baby. And all of a sudden she said, wait, I've left something inside. Nope, no rent, no house. And the whole family had to make their way to the workhouse, a grim place where men were separated from their wives, children were separated from their parents. And within a few weeks, baby Katie caught the fever and died, was buried in a big famine grave. Her poor mother, hearing the news, started to go down and died within a couple of months of a broken heart. The young man knew he had to leave that place. He took his little boy by the hand, made sure his wife had a Christian burial in the local graveyard. Couldn't afford a stone, of course. And with Sean by the hand, they walked all the way to Derry and took one of those terrible coffin ships to America. All the way there, the father told the little boy stories about Ireland, fairy stories, stories about his mummy in her youth, stories about his baby sister, and kept Ireland alive for him. When they got to Boston, the man got a job working in the big high houses, and as Sean grew up, he went into the building trade too, and generation followed generation. They were good workers, they made a lot of money. But about 5 years ago, they decided to come back to Ireland to see where all these stories happened. It was easy to find the churchyard, and they set about getting a stone to commemorate the great-great-granny. Then they went looking for the old thatched cottage, but all was there were 4 stone walls. The roof had long since caved in. But there was a for sale sign. We're going to buy it. People said, no, you can't buy that house. That's a haunted house. Nobody can stay in that house. Every night they hear a baby crying. Even walking past it, you hear the crying baby. They said, it's our family home. We'll buy it. And they did it all up. Whitewashed walls, beautiful golden thatch, painted up half door. Their daughter Kate was playing about in the house before they moved into it. And you know, in the old houses, the big fireplaces. And she'd heard stories how they used to have a little hole up the chimney where you keep salt to keep it dry. And she put her hand in. There was something there and she pulled it out. It was a piece of ragged cloth. When she opened that cloth, there was an old tin locket. And she opened that. There was a drawing of a wee baby. It said Katie, 1847. She ran and showed her father, and they realised this was what the great-great-granny had wanted back into the cottage for. They wrapped it up carefully. They buried it in the grave with the great-great-granny, and nobody ever heard the crying baby again.